Given how successful the Emerald Steel Floodborn discard was, I wanted to try the same concept but with a different color combination. Hence what you see on the screen here in the Ruby Steel, which is not a very common color combination, but what I call Floodborn Lore Drain and Damage. It utilizes the Honest John to drain lore from your opponents whenever you play a Floodborn character, and of course the Chief Bogo, which in my opinion is the best version of the when you play a Floodborn you get X effect by dealing damage to everything on the opponent's board. And we play a total of, I think, 20 Floodborn characters. So let's go ahead and break down this deck list, and then we'll talk about kind of what the concept is and how it's supposed to work, and we'll take a look at a match and see how it actually played out in real time. So to start things off, we've only opted to play 4 Captain Hooks. I was playing 4 Minnie Mouse, and one of the matches I might show that version of the deck, but I just found it too slow. And so 4 hooks, whether you see it on turn 1 or not, it doesn't really matter, because hook is a card that can trade up later on in the game. You can trade up into things like the Amber Queen and anything that has 3 willpower. So hook has application early and late game. If you end up not playing a 1-drop on turn 1, it's not the end of the world, because you do play a number of 2-drops which are good trades, like the Queen with Rush and the Cinderella at a 2/2. Going into your 3 slot, you have the Honest John and the Tinkerbell. So the Honest John is part of your core engine. You get this on field, you just kind of leave it there. Whenever you play a Floodborn, of which we play 20, you will drain a lore from the opponent. The Tinkerbell is there as a filter card, so using the effect to draw and discard helps you unbrick your hand if that would happen, as well as being a shift target for Big Tink. Still one of the best combinations of cards in the game, despite it coming from Chapter 1. Then on our 4-drop slot, we've got 3 Chief Bogo and 3 Jafar. This is our earliest possible Floodborn character, and if you've watched my other videos, I think it was the Emerald Steel discard Floodborn deck, where you saw me draw like 3 cards off of the Jafar, so it is relevant. You will draw cards off of it if your opponent is not careful. And then for the 5-drop packages, we've got 4 Maui as removal and 3 Queen of Hearts. Queen of Hearts is an insanely good card, especially when you drop it unsuspectedly through a shift. Your opponent likely doesn't expect it, and then it can draw you an insane amount of cards. I have a clip which you'll see I'll draw a decent amount of cards off of it, kind of just surprising my opponent with the shift on it. And because it shifts for 2, if you have more small queens in hand and you drop them and you rush them into a character, you can draw even more cards. Speaking of drawing cards, we also play the Beast Tragic Hero, of course, literally the best legendary in the game now at this point, overtaking Rapunzel. Very, very strong card. We play 3 Tremaine and 4 Tinkerbell and 3 Cinderella Stout-Hearted to round off our shift package. So in total, 20 Floodborns. Lots of things to trigger off the Chief Bogo and the Honest John with. And then of course, if you have multiple Chief Bogos on field, you're dealing 2 damage to everything, or multiple Honest Johns, you're draining 2 lore, or 3 lore if you have all 3 on board whenever you play a Floodborn character. The actions are just removals, so 3 Smash, 4 Teeth and Ambitions, which I'm not too sure how I feel about Teeth and Ambitions. It's hard to say. Because we're playing Steel, we might not need to play this card, but I'm including it in there for now. And then same thing with the Grab Your Swords and Be Prepared. The Grab Your Swords is kind of nice because you can sing it with a lot of the 5-drops that you have, and you play a ton of 5-drops, but it's not as impactful as Be Prepared. So like, would we be better off playing like 4 Smash and maybe like, I don't know, 2 Strength of a Raging Fire or the Storm Rage On instead of the Teeth and Ambitions? Or, you know, maybe we're also better off playing like 4 Be Prepared and no Grab Your Swords. There's a lot to experiment with there, but I think for right now I'm just testing this out. And then 2 Beast Mirror, because despite you playing the Queen, Jafar, and Beast Tragic Hero, you will still run into issues with drawing cards. So having this card, if in case you get into top deck mode, is really nice. It's also inkable, so there's virtually no consequence in playing it. And then of course, the main issue with trying this color combination is there's a lot of good cards and a lot of them are uninkables. So we've tried to cap off at 15 uninkables, which we are able to do, and 45 inkables. This allows us to hopefully continue to ink and play enough on curve that we can get to all of our drops. Mainly once you get to 7, you're pretty much golden, right? If you have your board set up the right way, every time you drop a Floodborn, you are getting some sort of advantage back against your opponent. So that is the deck list. Let's go ahead and jump into a match or 2 and you'll see how it plays out. So this is the second full match that I played with this deck, and this deck list is the same version that I reviewed in the beginning of the video. The first match that I played with this deck, I was running stuff like Minnie Mouse, and that match was like a 20-minute long match, so I decided to change the deck to make it a little bit faster. And that's exactly what you see here. Going up, funnily enough, against another Ruby Steel, which you never see, at least I never see it. So a good way to kind of see if my version is going to hold its weight in the mirror match, in terms of color at least. Obviously this opponent showed Shere Khan, so they're maybe on a challenge focused version, whereas we're on the FLOODBORN focused version here. So my opponent is establishing a decent sized board, playing on 1, 2, and 3, but this setup that we have going here is absolutely crazy because we're about to pop off real big. So I'm taking a moment to think through how this is going to play out, and I'm definitely going to be shifting this queen onto the smaller queen because at 4-3 it will beat over the prince. We drain a lore off of the Prince John, and we draw a card off of the queen, taking out the prince, taking 1 damage on the queen itself. Then we're going to use Honest John, sorry, in order to take out the hook. We draw a card off of that because of the queen. Then because we drew into a smaller queen again, we're going to be able to ink and play that smaller queen in order to take out the Cinderella on the opponent's board, drawing a total of 3 cards off of the shift queen and outing the entire opponent's board in the process, ending on Honest John and a queen ourselves. The opponent ends up outing our queen with the Let the Storm Rage on, but that takes up their turn. They lose tempo. We have card advantage, we have board advantage, we have tempo. You can just see how this deck was able to pop off in that scenario. Clearly the opponent is setting up for a Tremaine shift play. They are likely on Uninkables in their hand, and this is one of the main problems with this color combination, is that there's a lot of good cards, a lot of good removal cards, but they're all uninkable usually, and so you have to really pick and choose which ones you want to use. Otherwise you run into a situation that my opponent is running into right now, where they're just stuck on uninkables. And it's one of the reasons why I did not opt to include Baby Tremaine in my version. First of all, because there's no real way to bounce them back to hand, which is what you would do in the Ruby Amethyst version, and where you get a lot of value off of Baby Tremaine. Whereas in this version, she's basically just a shift target and I don't really need it. So I'd rather just play more FLOODBORN. So like you saw in the deck list, we play 20. So the opponent drops double Tremaine, and I'm like, that's totally fine here. Their 1 Tremaine is already on 3 damage. We draw a Tremaine for turn, and because of the new update to Pixelborn, I should have dropped my Tremaine here, because I could have chose the sequencing and chose to activate Bogo first to take out their damaged Tremaine, and then my Tremaine would resolve, forcing them to remove their last Tremaine on field. So I could have wiped out their whole field that way, but regardless, you know, turn 6, turn 7 coming up here, the opponent could be on a Be Prepared. So, you know, I was really playing into that, and I didn't realize until after I played the Cinderella and was like, oops, that's not great. But the opponent didn't end up having it, or at least not having the ink to play it. They do play the Diabolical Scheme or Plan or whatever it's called in order to out one of my cards. Then they reveal the Grab Your Sword. So yeah, just a bunch of uninkables in their hand. They can't progress their board state. We have removal ready to go. The opponent gets to 7 ink finally, and they drop the Cinderella. So they did have inkables, they just didn't want to use them. And so as soon as they drop the Cinderella, we're going to go ahead and drop the Tremaine. The opponent kind of realizes, yep, there's nothing I can really do, and they just end up scooping it up after that. Alright, for the true fans that have made it this far in the video, just remember to drop a like if you've enjoyed the content so far, because this next match took a very long time to edit. It was a 20-minute match originally, but after editing and speeding it up, I think it's just about 8 minutes long. This is when we were on the Steel Ruby version that was running the Minnie Mouse for the Synergy with Teeth and Ambitions, but like I showed you in the beginning, we've opted away from that deck list and went with the one in the match that you saw earlier. We're going up against a competitive Sapphire Steel deck. This is a deck that had a lot of success in November, winning some tournaments as well, I believe. And it's basically like Pawpsicle control, but a little bit more focused on mid-range rather than endgame, because with Steel, you can deal with a lot of early threats much easier, and you can close out the game faster. You can still close out the game later on, but you're just not as effective as Ruby because you don't have Be Prepared and Maleficence like you do with the Ruby Sapphire version. Regardless though, I make a mistake here and accidentally use the Tinkerbell effect when I meant to quest with it, so I end up discarding one of my Honest Johns. But this board state looks fairly manageable, and knowing that my opponent is on Steel, I don't have to really worry about board wipes except for Tinkerbell into Grab Your Swords, which does 3 damage to everything on board. The Cogsworth is a bit of a problem, but I can get the Tremaine out to out the Cogsworth. So because it had resist 1 on the Mickey, I had to crash into it with the Tinkerbell first, then use the Jafar, and Jafar gets us to draw 1. We're gonna go ahead and drop Honest John here. Oh yeah, because we're not at the necessary ink in order to use the Lady Tremaine. And then, just like I said earlier, the opponent ends up dropping the the Tinkerbell into the Grab Your Swords to completely wipe my board, and what looked like a decent position for us all of a sudden becomes terrible. Now we're going to force them to choose which one they want to keep. They opt to keep the Tinkerbell. So Lady Tremaine helps to equalize the board state a little bit, but my opponent is definitely in a superior position. We haven't seen a Chief Bogo. I think in this list I was only running 2, and obviously in the Decklist version I upped it to 3. We've seen both of our Honest Johns, but they haven't done really anything, unfortunately, and now we're in this game state. Now, the queens here are actually quite relevant if we can establish a bit of a board and start challenging, and I really do think queen is underrated. They're laying it on thick with the heavy hitters right now between the Tinkerbell and the Hades. They've got a good board presence. They've got 3 cards in hand still, and I still have to worry about potentially trying to play around to be prepared. But you're gonna see what we're gonna be able to do here is use the Tremaine to challenge away that Mickey and draw a card off the queen, and thankfully it draws us into a Be Prepared. The Tinkerbell will deal 2 damage to my queen because it took out the Lady Tremaine, and I'm just hoping my opponent overextends here a little bit. Okay, they're gonna waste a Pawpsicle to try to heal up the Tinkerbell, and then they're gonna drop a Nick Wild to get back the Pawpsicle, and I'm like, okay, yep, just widen your board. They waste another resource and fire the cannons on my queen, and then play the Pawpsicle, which will draw a card. And this is okay, because now I can utilize the Be Prepared, and I have Tremaine as follow-up. So the board state is fairly equal, but as with every Sapphire deck now that runs Pawpsicle, all it takes is for them to draw 1 Hiram and get their draw engine rolling once again. The Tremaine here will out the Cogsworth, which is nice. They drop yet another Tinkerbell and a Captain Hook, and so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to quest with this Tremaine. I do have another Be Prepared in hand. Maybe I just drop Cinderella, maybe get them to commit a little bit more to their board, and then use Be Prepared. At this point, I'm thinking they're not on a whole new world because they would have played it by now, and they've went through enough cards that they probably would have wanted to dump their hand and refresh once they had multiple states of board presence over me. But yeah, I'm just gonna have to function off. They're not playing Be Prepared because Sapphire has enough draw. Unfortunately, they do have another Grab Your Swords, and again, the board state right now looks kind of dire. Instead of going for the Be Prepared, I'm gonna opt to try to draw up with the queen. So we're going to go ahead and crash into the Hook, which takes out the Tremaine, and then I'm going to drop Minnie Mouse in preparation of if you use anything or exert anything, my queen will be able to draw cards off the Minnie Mouse challenging, and then I'll be prepared next turn. However, the opponent reveals that they are indeed on a whole new world, and I'm like, okay, that sucks because I just lost my Be Prepared. They drop a Hades to out the queen so I don't draw cards off of crashing the Minnie Mouse, and then they reveal Last Cannons, and I'm like, okay, that's actually really nice tech in my opinion, because it makes your small characters actually able to trade up quite effectively, and being items, they just work with Hirams. Thankfully though, we do have a Maui, and we draw into another Be Prepared, and I'm just like, man, like this guy's gone through a good portion of his deck. I don't know if he's got more whole new worlds. This is crazy. He drops the Hiram and undoubtedly is going to draw 2, banishing a Last Cannon. I don't know why you wouldn't banish a Pawpsicle there though, honestly, but hey, whatever. They drop a Winnie the Pooh now, and I'm like, geez, this thing, you know, you might think like I think Winnie the Pooh's not that great, but the fact that it quests for 2 is actually a bit of a problem. So they're going to be able to quest with the Beast. We're just going to quest with Minnie and then just wipe the board. The opponent's on 3 cards. I'm anticipating they have another whole new world given how aggressively they played out their hand. They've got 3 cards left. So all we can really do as follow-up is ink and drop a Jafar, because that's all we have the ink for. The opponent drops a Cogsworth. They still have 5 ink to work with. They drop another Winnie the Pooh, and I'm like, okay, I'm safe from a Be Prepared for now. I'm debating dropping the Benja, but what am I really going to take out of 3 items? This is what I've talked about in my Pawpsicle list before. It's like Benja doesn't do enough in order to deal with the opponent's board. So instead, I just double drop Beast and Tinkerbell in anticipation that the opponent has another whole new world. They're going to Last Cannon the Winnie the Pooh and crash it into my Jafar, and I'm like, that's actually really good for me. I'd rather you do that than quest. They make a mistake in forgetting to use a Pawpsicle to heal their Winnie the Pooh before playing their Nick Wild, so that benefits me. And then they're going to play a Let It Go, and I'm like, if they sing a whole new world without Cogsworth, I'm in trouble. They don't, and we double draw for Beast Tragic Hero. Interesting that they also valued Let It Going the Tinkerbell over the Beast, but that's why I thought definitely they had a whole new world, because they didn't care if I drew, because they're going to reset everything anyways. But we drop Maui and we drop a Tinkerbell, dealing 1 damage to everything. Our Maui is exerted, and we can take out the Winnie the Pooh now that the Cogsworth is gone, so the opponent's characters lose the resist +1 they get off the Cogsworth. And this puts my opponent in an awkward position because they have to use their Pawpsicle to heal their Nick if they want to crash it into my Beast, so that's why I ended up questing with Beast. But I did not expect them to have another last cannon. And so with this last cannon, they're definitely going to be able to trade up into my Beast, and this is why this card was, you know, nice, interesting tech, in my opinion. And their Nick Wild will survive because of the Pawpsicle healing it, and now I have to trade my Maui into it, essentially, in order to get it off the field. Instead, I opt to try to trade my Tinkerbell and put 2 damage on the Mickey, which in hindsight is probably a little bit of a misplay. I probably just should have got rid of the Nick Wild with the Maui. But the opponent is in top deck mode. They grab a Cogsworth. Again, I think they've gone through all 4 at this point. They quest with Mickey up to 14. I draw a Minnie Mouse, which isn't great. I'm just going to put questing power on board with the Benja, make a misplay and not doing the Tinkerbell first. And I'm just laying out my whole hand at this point. We're going to Maui away the Mickey Mouse instead, so you can see why that was a misplay. I could have saved 1 damage on my Tinkerbell and quested for 2, but it's fine. They top deck a Winnie the Pooh, and I'm like, okay, they're definitely putting the questing pressure on me now because they're questing for 4, and we top deck a Cinderella off of the Tinkerbell, which is really good. So we discard whatever it is we drew there, and the opponent ends up resigning. That's going to do it for this video. It's a long one, but hopefully you enjoyed this unique deck profile, and stay tuned for the Ruby Amethyst version that uses the Blue Fairy. That one is actually pretty good in my opinion. So yeah, well, that's going to be the next video. Thank you again for watching. If you've made it this far, Quantum is out.